Our next question for First Selectman Jon Zagrodzky, as part of this Ask the First Selectman series, is actually a combination of several questions we've received, so I've kind of merged them all together. People say, I'm worried about development in town. Is it changing the character of Darien, and is it going to add a lot of traffic? And how do we know that when the Palmer's project and the Corbin district are all finished, that we're not going to be stuck in gridlock? Ideas, Jon?
That's not an unreasonable question. When I did my State of the Town address in December, one of the slides that I showed was addressing this very topic. And on that particular slide was a study that was done, and the title of the study was Solutions to the Problem of Traffic on the Post Road. And the study was dated 1952. So the reason I bring that up is that people have been concerned about traffic on the post road for an extremely long time. That said, there are, I think, some reasons to be hopeful about this, and I'll provide a few facts to help inform this. So the first thing is we do traffic studies for all the new developments in town, and they look at not just traffic flows, but in particular peak traffic flows and when those traffic flows take place. And we think about not just when the traffic is going to occur, but also how entrances and exits from businesses and parking lots affect that traffic flow. And they're pretty good at engineering solutions around that. So an example of that would be when Whole Foods went in at the corner of the Post Road, right there where the BMW Darien dealer is at I-95. When that development went in, there were a lot of concerns about traffic just at that intersection, busy place. And it's busy not just because of Whole Foods, but also because of the BMW dealership. When they engineered that intersection, that they put in changes and improvements to the traffic signaling and all that. And honestly, you drive right over there, what you find is traffic ended up not being a problem at all. And that's because our traffic engineers are actually very good at reading these studies and coming up with good solutions for all these intersections. We also make physical improvements to the intersections, not just signaling. Think about how much better traffic is at West Road and Roten Avenue when we put in those two left turn lanes on either side of Roten, or excuse me, on West Road. That made a huge difference in traffic right there. Similarly, we're planning a similar improvement at Ledge Road, or excuse me, Heights Road on Hollow Tree Ridge, where the Heights Crossing development is going to take place. That's all going to be re-engineered. So there's a lot behind the scenes that goes on to ensure that these developments don't result in undue traffic burdens. Now, that said, I'm not going to say that we're going to get away from traffic. Like I said, it's been a problem for a long time. You have the additional issue of tremendous amounts of development in Stamford and Norwalk. And we've got an AI software we've subscribed to that tracks cell phone locations. And it's pretty interesting and powerful. And one of the things we're hoping to get from that is a sense of, when you think about traffic in town, where is it coming from? Is it just Darien residents driving around in town? Or is a lot of the traffic, say on the Post Road, cross traffic from Norwalk and Stamford, where we have, you go over there and you can see the pace of development is frenetic. I mean, the number of apartments, all that's being built in those two places, that's actually also driving a fair bit of traffic in town. And when you combine that with Waze type technologies that when it senses traffic, it sends you in routings into less used roads in town. So a lot of residents have called up complaining that says, wow, we're seeing traffic on our little quiet street that we never saw before. And again, it's because technology is routing cars to roads that have less traffic. So I think the combined message on all this is, look, there's going to be traffic we can't get away from. This whole area in Lower Fairfield County, from Greenwich out to Westport for I-95 and all the roads in between, it's a traffic problem. It's been that way for a very long time, and there's no kind of snap your fingers solution to that. At the same time, I think the combination of traffic studies, traffic signal engineering, and all of that really does make a difference in terms of mitigating that. And we're on top of it every day. So more to come on that, but that's hopefully an answer to your question.
Jon Zagrodzky is our first selectman, and this is the program where you get to ask him questions. If you have a question for our Ask First Selectman series, just drop it in the email, darientv79@gmail.com, and we'll ask the first selectman. Okay, we're cranking them out here. Number 3. Jon Zagrodzky, our first selectman, is joining us on the program again today to answer your questions. Um, Several questions along the same theme, Jon, so I've kind of combined them all. People say, I'm a concerned parent with kids in the Darien schools. The quality of the schools is why we moved to Darien. But now these questioners say that they feel that the Board of Ed's budget is being crippled by the Board of Finance. How can that happen, and what can I do as a concerned parent to make sure our schools are adequately funded?
So thanks for that question. As many of you know, I was on the Board of Finance for 13 years and chaired that board for 6 years. So I'm very familiar with the Board of Finance role in the process of deliberating the Board of Education budget. I guess I would back up, and I want to make probably one unsatisfying point about all this, which is that in any kind of democratic system, the decision-making authority is dispersed and the power to make those decisions spread out among multiple people. And inevitably that results in tension and difficult discussions and back and forth and compromise. And I'm not saying that we're compromising on the education for our students, but rather to say that anytime one group will present what they want to do, there's inevitably in a democratic system another group that comes in and is going to question those decisions. And the idea is to try to arrive at something that satisfies most of the people most of the time for whatever decision that is, budgets or something else. And so what you're seeing with not just the Board of Education, but really my budget for the Board of Selectmen is that we face that process where we've got not just our decision, but several decision-making bodies down the line that are going to have a role in deciding what we can spend. And I think that as a process matter for the town, setting aside the current Board of Education budget debate, that's a good thing for this town and really for any democratic system. The more eyes, more hands on a decision, the better that decision is going to be. And importantly, the more buy-in it's going to have and the more durable that decision is going to be. But let's talk about the Board of Education for a minute. So as a statutory matter, the Board of Education is an agent of the state of Connecticut. And that status or designation empowers them to make their own decisions about their budget, such that once they make a decision, the individual line items, how many spent, what specific things they are investing in, say in their operating budget, that can't be questioned by any other board. The Board of Finance can come in and say, we don't want spending to exceed a certain number, but they can't come in and micromanage the elements of that budget. Neither can the RTM. So once the Board of Education votes on their final budget, unless the Board of Finance or the RTM makes a cut, that's it. That budget is set. So where are we in this process? The Board of Education goes through a lengthy effort to come up with their budget. It starts with the superintendent coming up with a budget, then that's deliberated by the Board of Education. But overlaying all that is what we call guidance from the Board of Finance. So the Board of Finance, when I was chairman and now under the current chairman, Jim Palin, what they try to do is to provide some general guidelines for how both the Board of Education and the Board of Selectmen should think about their budgets. Because remember, the Board of Finance's job is to make sure that total spending in town does not go outside what we reasonably feel we can afford. And I think at a very high level, that's a good check on everybody because we all got to take a step back and say, wait a minute, is this consistent with a financially well-run town? And make sure that our decisions and recommendations are calibrated against that standard. And so when the Board of Finance issues its guidance, which typically is around, look, you should ensure that your core spending that is not changing doesn't exceed some level. It can be inflation plus a bit, and that we want to scrutinize anything that you're adding to that budget just to make sure that it's discussed widely and agreed on. And so that is a general guidance that they've given for the Board of Education this year. And the superintendent is trying to meet those standards. My guess is that there's still more to come with the Board of Education budget in terms of trying to make sure that the needs of students are met. But I think I can speak for every single member of the Board of Ed when I say that all of them are very mindful of exactly the point the questioner asks, which is, look, didn't we all move here for the schools, or aren't young parents here really to benefit from a first-class education for their children? Every one of those 9 members of the Board of Education is completely focused on that point. There are going to be disagreements about how best to get there, individual components as to whether that's exactly the right answer. but all of them are very motivated to make sure that Darien provides the best education for students anywhere in the state, let alone the country. And they're very focused on that. So what I would do is have faith in their decision-making process. To answer your specific question, which is, how can I make my voice heard? Well, the Board of Education provides multiple forums for that, and you should make sure that your voice is part of that. And you also should make sure that if you have like-minded parents, that you come together and try to speak with a single voice. Often that has more effect than just a single person speaking out about the budget. And you also should speak to the Board of Finance. I know I had many, many calls from parents when we were looking at the Board of Education budget when I chaired the Finance Board. And I took those suggestions seriously. Reach out to members of the RTM, the moderator, the chairman of F&B, and make sure your voice is heard. And you're welcome to call me. I'm happy to talk to anybody about the Board of Ed budget, even though the Board of Selectmen has no direct role in that. But I think we all share a mission and a common goal of first-class schools with no compromise. The question is how best to get there, and doing it with open dialogue is the best way.
If you have a question for our first selectman, Jon Zagrodzky, send it along to us and we'll ask it. Just address it to Ask the First Selectman, and address it to darientv79@gmail.com. Okay. All righty.
1 second, check one. Sure.
Yep.
All right.
We're halfway home. All set?
Yep.
Okay. We got a couple of questions for Ask the First Selectman, our first selectman, Jon Zagrodzky, dealing with winter. And this person writes, the Public Works Department does a great job of clearing our streets, but isn't there a local law about clearing sidewalks in front of private homes? And has it ever been enforced? How can I get my neighbors to do the right thing if they leave those sidewalks all covered with ice and snow? John?
That's a fair question, and we've had a real winter this year, so a timely one. I did just want to do a shout out to the Public Works Department based on your comment about our streets being well plowed. I love everybody in New Canaan, but I drove up there yesterday, and our guys get an A plus, and those guys get a B plus. The plowing is just better in Darien, and so kudos to our professionals in Public Works that take care of that. I really appreciate it. As far as sidewalks, we do actually enforce that. It's absolutely that's something that we pay attention to. It's done on a case-by-case basis. So just to review, if you have a private property, and that could be either a commercial business or a residence, and you have a sidewalk on your property, you are required by town ordinance to clear that sidewalk when there is a snowstorm. And the reason for that is that we have those sidewalks to provide safe passage for pedestrians or school children walking to work. And so it's important to take responsibility for that section of sidewalk at your home or business to make sure that's cleared so that our pedestrians can get around town safely. Now, I recognize that there's not going to be perfect compliance with that. Sometimes people are traveling or can't get out of their house or have other issues. But the police, they do look at this and they do absolutely enforce the ordinance. It is done on a case-by-case basis. It will be done when they encounter conditions that are particularly unsafe with a sidewalk. So for example, if there's been snow that's been plowed up on the sidewalk or it's impassable. And they do it by reaching out to individual homeowners. So this can be knocking on doors. They have issued warnings for that to try to get people to comply. And in some cases, they have issued fines. What I would do is that if you have a sidewalk that is particularly impassable or that's created real trouble for you or pedestrians in your area, give the police department a call. They'll try to work with the homeowner to figure out a way to get that sidewalk cleared. But my general philosophy on this is the same that we had when the issue of the noise ordinance came up. You'll recall that there was a debate about whether we needed to enact a noise ordinance in town that prohibited certain types of noise or really set in harsh rules for that. What I find with that and with, say, something like sidewalks is we do have an ordinance in place, but the best way to go about doing this is simply ask the people that are not following that ordinance to comply. So whether it's a sidewalk that's not cleared or a garbage company that's sending garbage trucks your way at 3 o'clock in the morning, placing a call to those folks and say, hey, this really is not reasonable. Could you comply with the ordinance or stop that noise? Many times that will resolve itself. And actually, many times that's the approach that the police department uses. Have a conversation with someone and try to get compliance that way rather than having to escalate or do something like imposing fines. So bottom line is, if you have a problem with something like this, whether it's clearing sidewalks or something else, asking is the first step in trying to get someone to do what they're supposed to do. But if you need help from the police department, they are more than willing to help you, and they'll do it in their usual friendly, professional, and courteous way.
If you have a question for our first selectman, send it along to us. We'll be glad to ask it. Just email it to DarianTV79 at gmail.com.